The hall was filled with glowing lights, tall alien pillars, and hundreds of strange faces watching closely. Their eyes were sharp, some glowing, some shifting colors, but all focused on one man who stood alone in the center. He was a human, dressed in worn-out clothes, his boots covered with dust from long travel. His shoulders were heavy, not from fear, but from the weight of being the only human in that place. Around him, laughter spread like fire, cold and mocking, each sound digging into his pride. "Play it, human," one of the aliens said, pointing toward the large instrument placed before him. The object looked like no human creation. It was tall, made of shining crystal, with strings that moved on their own as if alive. The aliens called it the Xenotone. It was said only the noble born of their race could play it. The reason was simple. This instrument did not just react to touch, it reacted to the heart. Weakness made it scream, pride made it shatter, but pure emotion made it sing. To the aliens, humans had no place near it. To them, humans were crude, simple, and without the depth required to awaken its soul. The man looked at the instrument, then at the crowd. His hands remained calm at his sides. He did not answer their taunts. A tall alien with blue skin leaned forward and smirked, "Show us what your kind is worth? Or will you stand there, afraid like a child?" More laughter followed, harsh and cruel. Some aliens clapped mockingly, others hissed. To them, this moment was a game, a way to humiliate the stranger who dared to walk into their hall. But the man did not move quickly. He stood still, as if weighing the world in his mind. He thought of Earth, far away, of the small things that gave meaning to his people, the old songs sung by fires, the quiet lullabies whispered to children, the anthems of soldiers who never returned. He remembered them all as he stared at the glowing strings of the Xenotone. The crowd grew restless. "Do you not hear us, human?" one alien shouted. "Touch the strings. Let us hear the noise you make." Another one leaned forward, his voice filled with venom. "Maybe your species has no music at all. Maybe you are as empty as your weak bodies." The hall erupted again in cruel laughter. The sound bounced off the crystal walls, echoing endlessly, as if the whole building laughed with them. Still, the man did not break. He walked forward slowly, each step echoing across the silent floor. The Xenotone loomed before him, its surface glowing with a strange living light, as if it waited for the touch of a worthy hand. Up close, it seemed even more alien. The strings vibrated faintly without being touched, giving off whispers, like distant voices trapped inside. His hand hovered above them, but did not yet make contact. The aliens leaned closer. Some sneered, ready to laugh when he failed. Some smirked, expecting disaster. To them, this was entertainment. To him, it was something different. This was not about pride. This was about showing them that humans, though mocked, carried something they had never seen. He remembered being told once that music was the soul of humanity, the language that never needed words. Now in this hall, with hundreds of cold eyes upon him, he felt that truth burning in his chest. His heart beat slowly but firmly, like a drum before battle. He placed his fingers gently on the strings. For a moment, silence filled the hall, a silence so deep it was heavier than sound itself. The first touch sent a rough vibration through the room. It was harsh, broken, almost painful. The aliens exploded into laughter, slamming their hands on the tables, mocking even louder. "Pathetic, just as we said," one shouted, his voice sharp. Another shook his head. "Even children do better." The human said nothing. His eyes closed. He inhaled slowly, as if pulling strength from every memory he carried. His hand steadied on the glowing strings. Inside his mind, he was not in that hall anymore. He was back on Earth. He saw the faces of his people, the sound of the wind over fields, the cries of loss, the warmth of love. All those feelings, all those stories rushed into his hands. He was not there to impress. He was there to let the instrument know who humans truly were. The aliens leaned back, some rolling their eyes, expecting more failure. To them, this challenge was already over. To him, it was only beginning. His body was calm, but inside his chest burned a storm that no one could see. The Xenotone pulsed faintly under his fingers, as if it sensed something different, something it had not felt before. The man remained still, ready to strike again, ready to answer the challenge not with words, but with something that would reach deeper than laughter, deeper than mockery. The hall, filled with cruel smiles only moments before, grew strangely quiet again. The mocking still lingered, but softer, as if even the aliens felt a shift in the air, something they could not yet understand. The human stood before them, one hand on the living strings of the Xenotone, eyes closed, waiting for the moment to begin. The challenge was no longer theirs, it was his, and the silence before the storm was more powerful than any laugh. The Xenotone stood tall like a tower of crystal, glowing with soft light as if it were alive. It was not an ordinary instrument. It was shaped with curves that looked both beautiful and dangerous, and the strings stretched across it shimmered like threads of light, changing colors with every faint vibration. For the aliens, this was not just music. To them, the Xenotone was sacred, a symbol of their culture, of their pride, and of their superiority. Only the noble born of their kind were ever allowed to play it, and even among them, very few had mastered it. The reason was simple. This instrument did not answer to skill alone. It responded to the heart of the one who touched it. If the heart was false, the music became noise. If the heart was cruel, the sound turned harsh and unbearable. Only when the player poured out truth, raw emotion, and spirit did the Xenotone awaken and sing. That was why it was considered the most dangerous of all their instruments. It could lift the soul, or it could break it. And now, a human, of all creatures, stood before it. The crowd of aliens stared with mixed amusement and anticipation. They had no faith in him. They had seen humans before, traders, workers, soldiers, but never had one dared to touch their sacred Xenotone. To them, humans were still primitive beings who survived on luck and stubbornness. They believed humans had no depth, no culture that could compare to theirs. So when they shoved the instrument forward and asked the man to play, it was not a gesture of respect. It was mockery. They wanted to see him fail. The human looked at it carefully, studying every detail as if he could already sense its nature. His face was calm, though his heart was heavy. He had heard whispers before coming here, about how the Xenotone was not just played, but lived through. He understood the risk. If he failed, they would laugh louder than before. If he played badly, they would use it as proof that humans were nothing but weak intruders in a galaxy too grand for them. One alien, tall with silver scales, smirked and spoke loudly. "Careful, human. The Xenotone breaks those who are unworthy." His words were sharp, and the crowd chuckled. Another alien leaned forward, adding, "Do not bleed on it when it rejects you." The room shook with laughter, and some even banged their cups on the tables, ready for the spectacle. But the man did not answer. Instead, he stepped closer. His fingers hovered near the glowing strings. They hummed faintly as if sensing his presence, almost like they were alive. For a moment, he felt something strange, like the strings were watching him, waiting to judge him. He took a slow breath, remembering what music meant to his people. On Earth, instruments were never alive, but they carried hearts inside them because of the people who played them. Every violin, every guitar, every piano was more than wood and strings. It was the emotion of those who touched it. He thought of the old earth guitar his father once played, the way the strings sang in the night when the power was out, and the world felt dark. He remembered lullabies his mother sang softly, without any instruments, yet still more beautiful than anything else in the world. He remembered soldiers singing together on broken fields, their voices cracked but filled with courage. Music had always been part of humanity. It did not belong to nobles or rulers. It belonged to everyone who carried feelings too heavy for words. The human placed his hand on the Xenotone. A faint pulse ran through his skin, almost like touching a beating heart. The strings trembled under his fingers, not with sound, but with warning. He felt the weight of all the eyes on him. The aliens leaned closer, waiting for him to fail. Their smirks grew sharper. Their eyes glittered with cruelty. One of them whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Look at him. He has no idea what he is doing." Another added, "He will cry before the second note." The crowd laughed again, their voices echoing in the great hall. But the man's eyes stayed closed. He did not listen to their words. Instead, he listened to his own heart. He let his mind drift to memories of Earth, to the laughter of children, to the smell of rain on old streets, to the sound of waves crashing against rocks. He filled himself with every piece of emotion he could remember: joy, pain, love, sorrow, hope, and loss. Because he understood now, this instrument was not asking for skill. It was asking for honesty. The Xenotone began to glow brighter, as if recognizing something inside him. The aliens noticed and frowned. This was not normal. For a human to make it respond, even faintly, was already unusual. Some stopped laughing. Some crossed their arms, their eyes narrowing. The silver-scaled alien who had mocked him earlier leaned forward, his smirk fading just a little. The man breathed deeply, his hands trembling not with fear, but with the weight of what was about to happen. His heart beat like a drum, steady and strong, carrying the rhythm of humanity itself. He placed both hands gently on the glowing strings. The Xenotone hummed, louder this time, like a voice clearing its throat before singing. The hall grew quieter, as if even the walls were waiting for what would come. The human stood still for a moment longer, preparing himself. He was not there to win their approval, nor to prove them wrong. He was there to show them what it meant to be human. And when his fingers finally moved, when the first true sound of the Xenotone would break the silence, it would not just be music. It would be a story, the story of his people, carried in every note, every vibration, every echo. The crowd leaned closer, no longer laughing. Some still smiled, expecting failure, but something in the air had shifted. The human was ready, and the Xenotone was waiting. The challenge was no longer a joke. It was becoming something far greater, something none of them expected. The man's fingers finally touched the strings with a gentle press, and the sound that came out was rough, broken, and uneven. It was like stone scraping against metal, sharp and unpleasant to hear. The hall burst into laughter at once. The aliens slapped their tables, some even doubling over with amusement. Their laughter echoed so loudly that it almost drowned out the sound of the Xenotone itself. They mocked him openly. "I told you," one shouted. "He cannot even find a note." Another laughed so hard that his eyes watered, pointing at the human as if he were a child trying to hold a weapon too heavy for him. The man kept his eyes closed. His face was calm, though inside his chest his heart pounded. He had expected this. He knew the first touch would not be perfect because this was not an ordinary instrument. It was alive, it was judging him, and it was waiting to see if he was serious. The strings pulsed under his hand like veins of light, testing his spirit. If he gave up now, the aliens would be right. If he tried to force it, the sound would stay broken. He had only one path, to let go of fear and allow the music to come from deep inside, from the place where words could not reach. He remembered a moment from long ago, a cold night on Earth when everything was dark. His father had taken out an old guitar, scratched and old, and played softly under the stars. The sound was not perfect, but it carried warmth. It carried love. His mother had hummed quietly beside him, rocking him when he was a child. Those sounds had never left his heart. He took a deep breath, let that memory rise, and placed his fingers again on the glowing strings. The next sound that came was softer, uncertain, but different. The aliens paused in their laughter for a second, surprised at the sudden change. The sound was still fragile, like the voice of someone who had not spoken for years, but it carried something hidden inside, something that demanded attention. The man pressed again, this time letting his hand move gently, slowly, with care. The sound grew richer, like water flowing over stones. The crowd shifted. Some of the aliens frowned, their smiles fading a little. They had expected endless failure, endless noise, but now something else was forming. The human's breathing slowed, and his body relaxed. His hands moved across the strings with growing confidence, guided not by training, but by feeling. He was not fighting the Xenotone anymore. He was speaking through it. The first melody rose into the air, faint but clear. It was unlike any sound the aliens had heard before. It was not the sharp, proud tones of their own players. It was something raw, something simple, yet powerful. The notes carried sadness, the kind that sinks deep into the bones. It was as if the instrument was crying, but crying with dignity, not weakness. The hall grew quieter. The laughter that had filled the air only moments ago now softened into silence. The aliens leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, their ears straining to catch the unfamiliar music. The human song was not flawless, but it was real. Every note seemed to hold a memory, every vibration a story untold. He thought of soldiers marching in the rain, their boots heavy, their spirits tired, yet still singing together to keep themselves alive. The strings answered his thoughts, releasing a rhythm that echoed like footsteps on wet ground. He thought of children running barefoot in fields, laughter ringing like bells in the evening. The melody shifted, lightening, carrying a sense of innocence. Then he thought of graves, of silent goodbyes, of people holding each other in the darkest moments. The sound turned heavier, slower, pulling at the hearts of everyone who listened. Aliens who had been ready to laugh again found their throats tight. The silver-scaled one who had mocked him the most now sat stiffly, his smirk fading. The noble-born who had expected failure found their hands clenched. Even the guards at the far ends of the hall, who usually ignored such things, turned their heads toward the sound. Something in the music reached them in ways they could not explain. The human swayed slightly as he played, not in a performance for show, but as if carried by the flow of his own memories. His face was calm, but his eyes glistened behind closed lids. He was no longer standing in that alien hall. In his mind, he was home, surrounded by the voices of his people, singing not because they wanted to impress, but because they needed to be heard. The Xenotone glowed brighter with each note, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was no longer resisting him. It was answering him. Together, man and instrument told a story without words. The crowd sat frozen. The first laughter seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. The melody filled the air like a ghost, slipping past pride and arrogance, cutting through walls of superiority. The aliens felt things they had never wanted to feel: grief, longing, and something even harder to accept: respect for a human. The man's fingers danced slowly, weaving pain and hope together. At one moment, the notes rose high, like cries of joy. At another, they fell deep, like the sound of mourning. The hall was no longer just a place of mockery. It had turned into a place of silence, where every breath, every heartbeat followed the rise and fall of the music. And when the human finally opened his eyes for a brief moment, he saw what he had done. The proud aliens who had laughed at him were now staring with faces frozen in disbelief. Some looked angry at themselves for being moved, while others simply sat still, afraid to break the spell. He closed his eyes again, letting the music carry on, stronger than before. The laughter was gone. The hall that had mocked him was now caught in his story, trapped in his song. The Xenotone had accepted him, and with it, every alien who listened began to understand something they never thought possible: that a human could make their sacred instrument speak in ways even they could not. The first notes had been broken, but now the song was alive, and it was only the beginning. The music grew deeper, flowing through the hall like an invisible river. The human's fingers moved slowly, carefully, but every note carried a storm of feelings. The Xenotone was no longer just an alien instrument. It was now a bridge between hearts. The sound painted pictures, not with colors, but with emotions. The aliens, who had gathered only to laugh, now found themselves lost in visions they did not expect. The first vision was simple. A mother's voice could be heard in the gentle hum of the strings. They saw her bending over a small child, holding him close on a cold night, singing softly to make him sleep. The melody was warm, delicate, like the touch of a blanket on tired skin. The aliens who had children of their own felt a sudden tightness in their chest. They understood this feeling, though none of their own songs had ever carried it so clearly. The music shifted. The rhythm changed, becoming steady, like footsteps in the rain. The aliens saw soldiers in heavy coats, standing shoulder to shoulder under a gray sky. The humans' hands made the Xenotone cry and roar at the same time, echoing the sound of boots on mud, the sigh of men who knew they might not see another sunrise. The melody carried both courage and sorrow together. The proud warriors among the aliens sat straighter, their eyes narrowing. They knew battle, but they had never felt it told like this, not with such raw honesty. Then the sound softened again, becoming light, almost playful. The notes jumped like sparks, and the vision changed. They saw children laughing in the streets of Earth, chasing one another with bare feet, their voices ringing like bells. The melody carried innocence, the pure joy of being alive. For a moment, even the coldest alien faces relaxed. The sound was not about humans being weak or strong. It was about life itself, about moments that every living being shared. The man's fingers slowed, pressing harder now, and the hall filled with a heavy, almost unbearable sound. The aliens saw graves, rows of them, stretching far into the distance. The song spoke of loss, of final goodbyes, of people standing together in silence, holding each other when words were useless. The Xenotone trembled under his touch, glowing brighter, as if it too felt the weight of mourning. Tears formed in some alien eyes, though they tried to hide them. None of their own music had ever brought such visions so sharply, so painfully. The melody changed again, rising higher, and the sadness turned into something else: hope. The sound carried a promise, a whisper that even in the darkest moments, life could begin again. They saw faces lifting, hands reaching for one another, broken people choosing to stand and fight once more. The aliens felt it inside their hearts, a warmth that spread slowly, burning away the pride and the cruelty they had held only moments before. Every note told a story. The human did not speak a single word, but they could feel his memories, his world, his people. They saw the beauty and the pain of Earth, a planet they had once dismissed as simple and unimportant. Now, through this music, they felt its soul. The Xenotone was alive with light, glowing like fire in his hands, responding to every beat of his heart. The noble-born aliens who had mastered the instrument before could not believe what they were seeing. They had played the Xenotone with skill, with training, with years of practice, but never had it responded like this. The human was not trained, yet the sound was more powerful than anything they had produced. It was not technique, it was truth. The instrument was not hearing his fingers, it was hearing his soul. The hall was silent, except for the music. Aliens who had mocked him were now leaning forward, their eyes wide, their laughter forgotten. Some held their breath, afraid even to move in case the sound broke. For the first time, they were not looking at him as a human. They were looking at him as a voice of something greater, something that reached beyond race, beyond power, beyond pride. The human himself was lost in the song. His body swayed gently, his head bowed, his eyes closed. He was not performing for them. He was reliving memories. Every note was drawn from his own heart, from scars and joys that only humans carried. He thought of friends lost, of faces he would never see again. He thought of the sound of waves, of laughter by firesides, of hands holding his when the world felt broken. He let all of it flow into the Xenotone, until there was no difference between him and the instrument. The aliens felt as though the hall had vanished. They were not sitting in their grand chamber anymore. They were walking the streets of Earth, standing in the rain, holding loved ones close, burying their dead, rising again to fight another day. The song had pulled them into a story bigger than themselves. And then, for a long moment, the music softened into almost nothing, a single, trembling note that hung in the air like a final breath. The aliens leaned forward, waiting, desperate to know what would come next. Their hearts, proud and unyielding, had been cracked open. The Xenotone glowed so brightly now that it lit the entire hall, casting long shadows across the walls. They understood then, without words, what the human had shown them, that his people were not weak, not empty, not simple. They were full of feelings that could break or heal, feelings strong enough to move even those who thought themselves above all others. The music had turned their laughter into silence, their mockery into respect, their arrogance into reflection. And still, the human played, his fingers steady, his heart wide open, carrying them deeper into the story of humanity, where pain and love lived side by side, where weakness and strength were the same thing, where even tears had meaning. The aliens, for the first time in their long, proud history, began to see humans not as small, but as vast. And it was the Xenotone, in the hands of the one they mocked, that had forced them to see the truth. One by one, the aliens who had entered the hall with mocking smiles began to feel something they never expected. Their eyes, so cold and proud before, now glistened as the music washed over them like a tide. The Xenotone cried in the human's hands, not with weakness, but with power, as if it had been waiting for this very moment. The sound was heavy with sorrow and shining with hope at the same time. It touched corners of their hearts they thought were untouchable. At first, only a few aliens blinked more often than usual, their throats tightening. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to admit the feeling building inside. But the music pressed deeper, piercing the armor of pride they had worn for centuries. The melody grew softer, then louder, weaving between grief and joy like the rise and fall of waves. Each note carried a story of loss, of courage, of human love so strong it could survive even death. The sound did not ask for permission to be heard. It demanded it. A female alien with golden markings on her face raised a hand to her eyes quickly, pretending to scratch away dust. But it was not dust. It was the first tear she had shed in years. Others noticed, but said nothing, because they too were fighting the same battle. Their eyes burned, their chests ached, and no words could defend them against the music that was cutting through their pride. The human did not look at them. His eyes were still closed, his head lowered slightly, as if he was alone in the hall. He was not playing for them. He was playing for every memory, every person, every voice that lived inside him. That was what made the sound so pure. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to speak. The Xenotone glowed brighter with every note, the strings shining like rivers of fire. The hall itself seemed alive, vibrating with the power of the song. The air grew thick, almost trembling, as if the very stones of the building were listening. The aliens who had once believed only nobility could control the Xenotone now realized the truth. It was not about birth or power. It was about the heart. And this human's heart was stronger than they had imagined. The melody shifted again, this time into something softer, fragile, almost like a whisper. It was the sound of a lullaby, the kind a mother sings when her child is afraid. The aliens felt their throats tighten once more. Memories they had buried long ago rose to the surface, memories of parents long dead, of nights spent in fear, of hands once warm that would never touch them again. The tears they had hidden now began to fall freely. Some tried to turn their faces away, ashamed, but they could not stop it. One alien warrior, his skin covered with scars, pressed his fist against his chest, his breath shaky. He had faced countless battles without blinking, but now, because of a human song, his eyes were wet. A noble-born elder lowered her head, her tears dripping silently onto her robes. Even the guards at the door, trained to show no emotion, found their vision blurred. The hall was filled with tears, though no one wanted to admit it. The human's fingers pressed harder, drawing out a powerful, soaring note. It cut through the silence like a cry of defiance, strong and unbreakable. It was the sound of people who refused to be erased, of lives that refused to be forgotten. That note held every sacrifice, every dream, every heartbeat of humanity. The aliens felt it strike them in their cores. They realized they were not simply listening to a man play. They were listening to an entire species speak through him. The laughter that had once filled the chamber seemed distant now, like a memory from another time. The same aliens who had mocked him now sat in silence, their faces wet, their hearts trembling. Some wept openly, their shoulders shaking, unable to stop themselves. The human's music had done what no speech, no argument, no battle ever could. It had broken through arrogance and touched their souls. The Xenotone shone so brightly now that the entire hall glowed. Shadows fled from the corners, replaced by a warm, golden light that wrapped around everyone. It was as if the instrument itself was crying, sharing in the human story. The music no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to the room, to every creature who sat there, caught in its spell. The human did not notice their tears. His own eyes were wet, though closed. Drops rolled down his face, not from weakness, but from the memories that had come alive in the music. Every note was a piece of his heart leaving his body, carried into the Xenotone, carried into the hall, carried into the hearts of those who had never thought they could feel this way. When the melody softened again, falling into a slow, aching rhythm, the aliens leaned forward, afraid to miss even a single sound. Their pride was gone. Their mockery was gone. There was only silence, broken only by the sound of the Xenotone crying in the human's hands. It was a silence filled with respect, with awe, with something they could not yet name, but would never forget. Tears fell freely now. Some dripped onto robes, others onto the floor, glistening in the glow of the instrument. The proudest among them could no longer deny it. They had been moved, shaken to their very core. They had come to laugh, but they found themselves broken by a truth they could not resist. The human kept playing, lost in the song, lost in his memories, his heart open and unguarded. The aliens, for the first time in their lives, realized they were witnessing something greater than pride, greater than nobility, greater than themselves. They were witnessing the soul of humanity, and it had left them in tears. The last note of the melody faded into the air, hanging for a moment before disappearing into silence. The hall, which once echoed with laughter and mocking words, was now frozen. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath. The human's hands fell softly to his sides, the Xenotone still glowing faintly under his touch, as if it too was not ready to let go. His eyes slowly opened, and for the first time since he began to play, he looked at the crowd. What he saw surprised him. The aliens, who had stood so proudly before, now sat with wet eyes and trembling lips. Their faces were pale, their shoulders heavy, as though the music had stripped away their masks. No one looked at him with mockery anymore. Instead, there was silence so deep that even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. The great lords, the noble-born who had demanded entertainment, now bowed their heads, their arrogance melted into shame. One of the oldest aliens, his skin marked with silver patterns that showed his high status, slowly rose to his feet. His hands shook as he leaned on his staff. His voice, once strong and commanding, was soft now, almost broken. "Never," he whispered, "never has the Xenotone wept like this." His eyes, dimmed by age, were filled with tears. He looked at the human as if seeing him for the first time, not as a lesser being, not as a stranger, but as something greater than himself. The words rippled through the hall. The aliens shifted in their seats, murmuring softly, but none dared to argue. They all knew what they had just witnessed. This was not simply a performance. This was truth carved into sound, something so powerful that even their proudest hearts could not resist it. The Xenotone had revealed the human spirit, and in doing so, it revealed a depth they had never believed possible. The human did not smile. He did not bow. He simply stood there, his hands still tingling from the strings, his face calm. He had not played to win their respect. He had played because he could not do anything else. The music had demanded to be heard, and he had given it voice. He was not there to prove himself to them. He was there to remind himself of who he was, of who his people were. A younger alien noble stood suddenly, anger flashing in his eyes. His pride had been wounded more deeply than the others. He pointed a finger at the human, his voice shaking. This is impossible! A human cannot touch the Xenotone like this. It must be a trick!" His words cut through the silence, but they sounded weak, desperate. The hall did not support him. No one laughed. No one nodded. They only looked at him with pity. The truth had already been accepted by their hearts, whether their minds wanted to or not. The elder turned his head toward the young noble and shook it slowly. "No trick," he said, his voice carrying weight. "What we have seen here is beyond skill, beyond training. The instrument answered him because he spoke with his heart, something even we, with all our pride, have failed to do." His words silenced the young noble, who sat back down, his face burning with shame. The hall remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It was no longer heavy with arrogance. It was filled with awe, with respect, with something close to reverence. The human stood in the middle, still calm, though inside he felt the exhaustion of pouring out his soul. His hands trembled slightly, but he kept them hidden. He had given everything he could to that music, and now he was empty, like a candle burned to the very end of its wick. Then, slowly, something began to happen. One by one, the aliens stood. Not with jeers or mockery, but with bowed heads. They were not bowing to his body, but to the truth he had shown them. Even the proudest nobles lowered their gaze. They had come expecting to see a human humiliated, but instead they had been humbled themselves. The human did not ask for their honor. He did not seek their respect, but respect was given, and it was given in silence, in tears, in bowed heads. The Xenotone, now quiet, glowed faintly as if satisfied. It had chosen him, and through him, it had taught them all a lesson they would never forget. The elder spoke again, his voice breaking slightly. "From this day, the memory of this moment will not leave us. We saw a human play the Xenotone, and we saw it answer him. Let no one call his kind empty again. Let no one call them weak." His declaration sealed the truth, and none dared to oppose it. The human looked around the hall, his eyes meeting theirs. He did not speak. He had already said everything that needed to be said through the music. Slowly, he turned from the Xenotone and stepped back, leaving the instrument glowing faintly in the silence. The aliens watched him, their pride shattered, their hearts changed. For the first time, they understood that humanity was not small. Humanity was vast, filled with emotions too deep for words, strong enough to move even the proudest of alien hearts. and they knew this moment would never be forgotten, not in stories, not in songs, not in history. The hall remained quiet long after the last note had faded, as if even the walls themselves remembered the sound. The laughter that had once filled it seemed shameful now, like the voice of children who did not understand what they mocked. All that remained was silence, respect, and the memory of a human who had made the Xenotone weep. The silence in the hall stretched on, thick and heavy, until it felt like time itself had stopped. The human stood still in the middle of the chamber, his shoulders slightly lowered, his breathing steady but deep. The Xenotone had gone quiet now, its glow fading slowly, like a dying ember after a great fire. Yet its silence was not empty. It was full, like the echo of something that had already changed the world around it. The aliens, once so proud and mocking, could not lift their eyes to meet his. They had come expecting entertainment, expecting humiliation. Instead, they had been broken open by the sound of his soul. Then, from the front row, one of the highest nobles rose. He was tall, his robe decorated with golden lines that showed his rank, but now he looked smaller, humbled, as if the weight of the song still pressed down on him. He lowered his head and spoke in a quiet, rough voice. "We mocked you. And yet you showed us more than we have ever seen. We thought the Xenotone was ours alone, but it seems it was waiting for you." His words carried across the hall, trembling but true. Others began to rise as well. Some touched their chests in respect, others simply bowed their heads. One by one, every alien in the hall acknowledged what had happened. The human, who had walked in as nothing more than a stranger to them, now stood as someone they could not ignore. Their arrogance had melted into something far deeper, honor. But the human did not smile, nor did he raise his hands in triumph. He remained calm, his face steady, because he had not played for their applause. He had not played to win their hearts. He had played because he carried something inside him that could not be silenced. He had played because he remembered the songs of his people, because he knew the power of music to heal and to remind. And that truth was far greater than victory. The elder with the silver markings stepped forward slowly, leaning on his staff. His old eyes, clouded with age, were wet with tears that still had not dried. He looked at the human for a long time before speaking. "You must understand," he said, his voice carrying both sorrow and awe. "The Xenotone has never bent like this. Even our greatest masters could not make it weep as you did. We thought we owned it, but now we see it belongs to something greater. It belongs to truth, and truth lives in you." The words struck the hall like a hammer. No one could deny them. The younger nobles, who had once smirked in mockery, now shifted with shame, unable to meet the human's gaze. Warriors who had thought themselves unshakable clenched their fists, struggling with emotions they had never shown in battle. And the human simply stood there, letting the silence speak louder than any answer he could give. At last, the elder lowered himself to his knees. His staff clattered softly against the floor as he bowed his head. Gasps filled the hall. This was no ordinary man. It was one of the highest elders of their people. For him to kneel before a human was unthinkable. Yet, he did it without hesitation. One by one, others followed. Nobles lowered themselves. Warriors bent their heads. Even the guards at the doors dropped to one knee. The chamber, once a stage for humiliation, had transformed into a place of reverence. The human felt his throat tighten, but he did not let his voice break. He had no need for their kneeling, no need for their submission. Still, he understood what this moment meant. It was not about him. It was about his people. It was about humanity finally being seen not as weak, not as small, but as something vast. Something with a soul too deep to deny. Slowly, he turned back toward the Xenotone. He reached out one last time and laid his hand gently on the glowing strings. It pulsed faintly under his touch, as though it recognized him, as though it was saying farewell. The glow flickered once more before fading completely into stillness. The human stepped back, leaving it behind. He had no claim on it, no desire to take it. The song had been enough. The aliens watched every movement silent, their hearts still heavy with what they had felt. They knew this story would be told again and again, passed down to generations yet unborn. The night when a human played the Xenotone would not be forgotten. It would live in their memory like a scar, like a light, like proof that truth does not belong to one race alone. The The human turned his back to them at last and began to walk toward the doors. His steps echoed in the chamber, steady and unhurried. No one dared to stop him. No one dared to mock him again. Instead, they bowed their heads as he passed, honoring him in silence. And though he did not look back, he knew the moment would stay with them forever. As he reached the doors, the elder's voice rose once more, strong despite his age. From this day, let no one speak of humans as lesser. From this day, we honor them as we honor ourselves. For tonight, we have seen their soul. His words were carried by the silence, burned into the memory of everyone present. The doors opened, and the human stepped out into the night. The cool air touched his face, carrying away the weight of the hall behind him. Above, the stars stretched endlessly, watching silently, as though they too had listened. The human looked up at them, his chest heavy but steady. He had not come here to change the galaxy. Yet he had. With nothing but his hands, his heart, and a song, he had done what no weapon or war could ever do. Inside the hall, the aliens remained kneeling long after he had gone. None of them rose. None of them spoke. They were still caught in the echo of the Xenotone, still caught in the truth of what they had witnessed. For the first time in their long, proud history, they felt humbled. And they knew they would never forget the night when a human left them in tears, carrying with him not victory, but respect that would live forever.